The kitchen clock reads a few minutes past 4 in the morning. A woman sits at the table, still wearing the clothes from the day before. Her phone screen lights up with a message from a friend. "I know you're sad, but you need to get back out there." She reads the words and feels a strange disconnect, as if they were written in a language she no longer speaks. Weeks have passed since the person she loved left her life, and the heaviness has not lifted. It has gotten heavier. A single question circles in her mind. Is this still a normal reaction to loss, or has it become something else entirely? Sadness is an emotion every human being knows from the earliest years of life. When a child drops her ice cream on the sidewalk, her face crumples and tears roll down her cheeks. That feeling swells quickly, floods the moment, and then slowly recedes as something new captures attention. A sad mood acts like a signal, marking an event that matters before the emotional weather begins to clear. Most people grow up learning that sadness is a visitor, not a permanent resident. The friend's message relies on that shared understanding. Pain comes, pain goes, and life continues. Yet for the woman at the table, time has begun to feel like an enemy instead of a cure. The very phrase, "you're sad," seems to describe a photograph of a storm, while she is living inside a frozen landscape. To understand why those words miss the mark, we need to travel into the territory where sadness, grief, and depression part ways. Ordinary sadness is a transient emotional state, usually connected to a clear trigger. A harsh word, a small disappointment, a rainy afternoon can all summon a dip in mood that fades within hours or days. That temporary sorrow does not usually distort a person's sense of who they are. Even a strong bout of sadness still allows the mind to remember what laughter feels like. Grief, by contrast, is not a single emotion but a whole process of adapting to a significant loss. Loss can arrive in many forms. A loved one dies, a relationship ends, a deeply held dream collapses. Grief rearranges the inner world, pulling attention repeatedly toward what is no longer there. A grieving person may feel waves of yearning, anger, confusion, numbness, and intense sadness, sometimes all in the same afternoon. One moment, she may be telling a story about the person she misses, and the next moment, she cannot stop crying. These waves tend to come in bursts, with ordinary moments floating back in between, almost like breathing. During grief, the feeling of connection to the person or possibility that was lost often stays vivid and alive. Most importantly, grief is a natural reaction, not an illness, even when it is excruciating. For the woman at the kitchen table, the loss is fresh, and the waves have been battering her for weeks. Her friend assumes that what she is seeing is simply the heavy end of the grieving process. But certain parts of her experience are beginning to behave less like weather and more like a permanent change of season. She no longer feels the short breaks of calm that used to arrive between the waves. Something has started to seep from the loss outward, coloring everything she thinks about herself. Depression is not just sadness that lasts a long time, and it is not the same as grief. Depression is a clinical condition that alters mood, thinking, bodily rhythms, and the very ability to envision a future. One way to picture the difference is to compare an injury to an infection. Grief is like a deep wound from a clear event. Depression is like an illness that spreads through the whole body. For a diagnosis of depression, the low mood and loss of interest must be present most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks. This condition also brings changes in sleep, appetite, energy, and concentration. Crucially, depression often carries a persistent sense of worthlessness or excessive guilt that goes far beyond regretting a specific event. A grieving person may feel guilty about something said or unsaid before the loss, but the guilt usually stays tied to that relationship. In depression, the guilt can become a free-floating fog, whispering that the person herself is a burden, a failure, or fundamentally broken. The woman at the table remembers a moment earlier that evening when she could not finish a simple grocery list. As she stared at the blank paper, a thought surfaced not as a memory of loss, but as a verdict. I cannot do anything right. That verdict carried no connection to the person she misses. It pointed directly at her own existence. When self-criticism hardens into a stable belief about one's own worth, grief may be giving way to something deeper. Even the outward signs can fool a caring observer, because grief and depression share many surface features. Both can make someone cry often, withdraw from friends, sleep poorly, and lose interest in meals. In grief, pangs of yearning and sadness often alternate with moments of lightness, humor, or positive memories of the lost person. A child who lost a grandparent may sob at bedtime, then smile the next morning, while recalling a funny walk they once took together. Depression tends to flatten the emotional landscape, making positive feelings nearly impossible to access, regardless of the topic. This loss of capacity for pleasure is called anhedonia, and it is a hallmark feature of depression, but not of ordinary grief. In depression, a favorite song feels like noise, a hug from a friend feels like pressure, and a sunny day feels like an accusation. During grief, the world still holds moments of meaning. In depression, the world often turns gray and unreachable. A second crucial difference lies in the direction of the pain. Grief is primarily a reaction to an absence outside the self, the person, the place, the future that can no longer be touched. Depression, by comparison, turns the suffering inward, attacking the person's sense of identity. The pain of grief says, I miss her, while the pain of depression often says, I am nothing. Returning to the woman at the table, her friend's message told her to get back out there, as if a social push could reverse the tide. But if the core of her suffering is a belief that she is undeserving of connection, more social invitations will not reach the wound. There is another layer of complexity. Grief can sometimes create a doorway through which depression enters. The stress of a major loss can disrupt sleep, isolate a person from support, and activate a biological vulnerability to depression. In those cases, a person may begin with grief and later meet the full criteria for a depressive episode. That does not mean the grief was depression all along. It means one process cascaded into another, which changes what kind of help is needed. Some people also develop what clinicians call prolonged grief disorder, where intense yearning and preoccupation with the loss remain overwhelming and disabling years later. Prolonged grief still revolves around the lost person, while depression spreads its shadow across every area of life. Understanding these distinctions is not merely an academic exercise. When a society calls every deep pain sadness, it can pressure people to mask severe depression with a smile. When a society calls grief depression, it can pathologize a sacred human process and push medication before the heart has had time to mourn. The cost of confusion is highest for those who are suffering and cannot name what is happening to them. Imagine telling someone with a broken leg to simply walk it off, or telling someone with an infection to just wait until the wound heals on its own. Applying the wrong remedy to a psychological wound can delay the very support that would allow true healing to begin. For grief, the most potent support is often presence, patience, and the steady rhythm of compassionate human connection. For depression, that same compassion remains essential, yet it may also need to be joined by structured therapies or medical care that directly target the illness. The woman at the table has been trying to walk on a leg that she no longer trusts to hold her weight. She has been treating her pain as a failure to move on from loss, rather than recognizing the presence of an entirely different form of suffering. The central reversal comes into focus slowly, like a photograph developing under a red light. The pain that comes from losing someone you love is a proof of connection. The pain that tells you that you are the problem is a symptom of an illness. One kind of pain can coexist with self-worth, the other systematically dismantles it. When the woman first sat down at the table hours ago, She believed she was simply failing at grief. The real danger was not the intensity of her sorrow. It was the quiet voice insisting that she had always been broken. That voice is not the voice of sadness, and it is not the voice of grief. It is the voice of depression. Grief made her look backward toward what was lost. Depression made her look inward and see only wreckage. The moment of clarity lands with almost physical force. What she needs is not more advice to cheer up, but a different kind of help entirely. The difference between sadness, grief, and depression is ultimately a map that guides what actions can actually alleviate the suffering. Crying at a sad film passes with a good night's sleep. Grief asks for months of gentle adaptation and meaning-making. Depression, in many cases, does not lift without targeted intervention, whether psychological, medical, or both. None of these emotional states is a weakness of character, and none of them can be simply willed away. But confusing them can leave a person stranded without a compass, blaming themselves for an illness as if it were a personal failure. The woman at the kitchen table eventually puts down her phone and picks up a different kind of courage. She does not yet feel hope, but she makes a call to a professional who can help her sort through the heaviness. That simple act of naming the problem correctly is often the first movement away from isolation and toward recovery. Understanding this difference does not mean diagnosing everyone around you or reducing every tear to a label. It means listening more carefully to the story behind the tears and knowing when the story has shifted from loss to self-destruction. A 10-year-old might understand it like this. Sadness is like a scraped knee that stings and heals. Grief is like a deep wound that takes a long time to close, but still leaves the rest of the body strong. Depression is like an illness that makes the whole body feel weak and convinces the mind that it will never be healthy again. The treatments for a scrape, a wound, and an illness are different, and using the wrong one prolongs the pain. As the first pale light of dawn reaches the kitchen table, the woman has not solved her grief or cured her depression in a single night. But she has located the boundary between two different kinds of pain, and that boundary has just given her a place to stand.